Good morning, Grace Place. Super excited to be sharing with you this morning. And I want to start off today by just saying happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Hope you are having an amazing day. Your family is spoiling you, and watching this right now is not the first reminder that, oh yeah, it's Father's Day. So hopefully you have a great day and that your family treats you right today. So I also want to start off by saying today I am super excited to be preaching this message. The other day I was with some students and I mentioned that I was going to be preaching this morning, and a few of them were like, well, or I mentioned, like, y'all should come. And they were like, yeah, we will. And I was like, okay, sure, they'll show up. And even last night, me and my wife were getting ready for bed, and she was like, are any teenagers coming? And I was like, I hope so. And she was like, they're not coming, not that early in the morning. And 7 students showed up to be a part of this message. So thanks, guys. I'll pay you later. Super excited. So today I'm going to be obviously speaking to everyone at home, but I'm also going to be speaking to all the students that are here this morning. So hopefully that will create a really neat atmosphere to where I'll be able to be interacting with all of you. And so y'all feel free. Don't be awkward or weird. There's not secret cameras on you the whole time, just that one shot. So, but today we're going to continue what we started last week, a new series called What Lessons I Learned from the Lockdown. And what lessons have you learned from the lockdown? Or what lessons can we learn from Paul's lockdown in the Bible? And so today I'm going to be talking about our thoughts and everything up here in between our two ears, our thoughts, what's going on there. And the title of this message is How to Retrain Our Brain. And I think this is a pretty appropriate message this morning, and a great discussion or topic, because I don't know if you're like me, but I've been going a little bit stir crazy over the past few months of quarantine amidst all this COVID stuff. And I get it. I understand, and we're trying to be safe and whatever. But for me personally, an extrovert, if you were a part of our Who Are You series, I'm a 3. So it's really cool to have people here being a 3, by the way. But I'm pretty excited to be around people. So being excluded from people is pretty difficult for me. So maybe you're like me, you're a little bit obsessive during this time. You're kind of like, OCD on all these little things. And I'm a hard worker, but when I go to work in a normal setting, I come home and I'm kind of tired and I'm just kind of, chilling and relaxing. But now that I work from home, and I've been working from home, then when I'm done with work, I'm like, I got to do something. So my garage has never been cleaner. I've been like OCD fixing every single thing in the house. I've restained our deck. I've done all this building and all this stuff outside and all over the house. Why? Because I'm just kind of going stir crazy. I'm kind of losing it a little bit. I've even found myself, I don't know if you're like me, you ever just wander around the house? You ever just start walking and you end up in a room and you're like, why am I here? Anybody? I don't know. Okay, maybe that's just me, therapy. But for me, just kind of like my mind is just in a different place. And so I think it's really good for us to talk about our thoughts. And I think, last week, Kelly really introduced this subject really well, and talking about where Paul was at and how he was dealing with conflict and how he was dealing with worry. But I want to remind you kind of what was going on in Philippians chapter 4, which is where we're really focusing this series at. And I want to remind you a few things. Number one, the setting. Paul's in prison here. He's locked in this prison. And so everything we read about as we're reading scriptures today, I want you to keep that in mind. He wasn't writing this letter from this glorious place with, people feeding him amazing food and drinks. And, he's not sitting poolside in Mexico. He's in a pretty rough situation here, and he's in prison. The next thing is the theme. The theme here is present suffering versus God's blessing. He was keeping his eyes on the big picture because he was in a really, really terrible situation. But you wouldn't know it if you're reading Philippians 4. You would never know the setting if you didn't know history here, because his words and his tone is not setting that, or is not saying that. It was a temporary time that he knew that God could use him. And then the last thing is the author. It's pretty undisputed that Paul was the author of this book to the Philippians. And so I want to, keep those in mind. We know the author, we know the setting, and we know the theme here. And so it's so powerful that Paul was writing this letter from prison. And maybe it was because of the prison, not in spite of it. Because when he was in this confined space, God really used him to pen this incredible letter. And I was thinking about this other example of this and in a way that people can write amazing things, God inspired in prison. And I was thinking about the example of Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King, he went to Birmingham, Alabama, and he was going to lead protests and he was going to lead marches against everything that was happening. And this is in 1963. And so he went there with several other organizations to lead these marches. And on April 3rd, he began these marches, and their mission was equality. But on April 10th, there was a court-ordered injunction against them. And this is what it said. You can't boycott, no trespassing, parading, picketing, sit-ins, kneel-ins, wait-ins, and inciting or encouraging such acts. They were basically told, shut down, you're not going to do it anymore. And I know most of you guys know this story, but just 2 days later, on April 12th, Dr. King was arrested and thrown in jail. And so I know most of you guys know this story, but did it stop the movement? Did it hinder the movement in any way, shape, or form? Did it discourage the movement? No, it actually it kind of propelled it. But in that prison cell, he wrote one of the most famous letters. And I'm sure many of you have read it or at least remember bits and pieces of it. But it was called Letter from Birmingham Jail. And I want to read just one part of this letter to you. And so much of it is just so powerful. But this part really speaks to us as a church this morning. And he said this: the early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Wow. When he's talking about this early church, who is he talking about? He's talking about the church that Paul and these early disciples helped establish that we read about in the New Testament. And it's so powerful here that these disciples and these early Christians, they thought it honorable and worthy to suffer for what they believed. They weren't just, allowing circumstances and the culture around them to dictate how things were done. They were setting the culture. And he says here, they were a thermometer for what they believed in. So let's go back to Paul here. And I want you to think about it for a second. What was it like to be locked in a first century prison cell? Think about that. I don't know if any of you have been or any of you watching, maybe you've been in jail for an unfortunate circumstance, or maybe you visited jail. Thankfully, I've never been in jail. Hopefully none of you have been in jail. I don't know. Spencer, maybe, I don't know. But I've never been locked up in jail, but I have visited many jails on doing ministry, and I've actually preached in a couple jails, and it's pretty cool to be a part of that ministry, but I can't imagine the other side being locked in it. And that's today's system. Can you imagine what it was like to be locked in a prison 2,000 years ago? Back then, there weren't many laws to take care of the prisoners and make sure they had good systems for anything. Many times they didn't have hardly any food. The only food they might have is what people brought to them and snuck into the prison. The toilets, if you will, were pretty rough. They had very few for the amount of prisoners. It was just rodent infested. It was pretty terrible conditions. And many times, and it got worse the further inside the prison you are. So these are kind of the situations that Paul's dealing with. But yet, even in those conditions, I want to read what Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 through 9. He said, do not be anxious about anything. Remember, he's in prison. But in every situation, in prison, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving in prison, all the in prisons I'm adding, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. He goes on to say, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Wow. Once again, from prison. All of these words he wrote, and you would never know that he's writing them from a pretty hopeless, terrible situation. Probably hurting, probably hungry, possibly cold, possibly a horrible stench. No, all these different things going on, but yet he wrote this encouragement to the church there. And it's still words that can encourage us today. So why should it matter today? And so I want to talk to you just a little bit, some lessons we can learn from Paul in this situation. The first lesson is that we have to let God continually redeem our emotions. How easy would it have been for Paul to get caught up in his emotions right then? So I want to talk just for a second about Star Wars. And so I have one of my favorite characters from Star Wars is Chewbacca. When I went to Disney several years ago, I got my Chewbacca mug. So how many of you are Star Wars fans? Raise the hands. 2, 3, 2.5, 3, 3.5. Do I hear 4? I feel like an auctioneer here. But I'm not like psychotic Star Wars fan, but I'm right underneath that. You know, I'm not psychotic, although I drink from a Chewbacca mug most mornings. So I don't know, maybe. But there's a couple characters, I had to drink from it since I got my mug. Otherwise it's just awkward. It's just a prop. There really is coffee in here, folks. So thinking about the difference in Chewbacca and C-3PO. So if you know Star Wars hardly at all, and I know even casual fans or even non-fans probably know who these two characters are. I know you said you didn't earlier. So Chewbacca's the really hairy one that's like, 7 feet tall, and I can't make the noise, but I wish I could, but I'd embarrass myself if I tried to make the Chewbacca noise. Maybe in post-production we can edit it in. I don't know. Then there was C-3PO. Some of you remember C-3PO. He was the fully gold droid, and he walked around like, and he talked in a really high-pitched voice. Again, maybe we'll have some footage of this, but maybe not. But there's a huge difference in these two characters. One, even though he didn't speak any actual words, he spoke a lot, if you will, in the movies, because he would always get emotional. He'd always get mad. Chewbacca would just, and get super angry. That's not the noise, but you get it. He was super emotional. And then there was C-3PO. He was a droid. He was programmed. He didn't have any emotions, and he would always think logically. And at first glance, when we're going through difficult times, many times we want to be like, I want to be like C-3PO. I don't want to have any emotions. I don't want to be emotional in this situation. I just want to think logically and remove all of my emotions from these bad situations. But I want to encourage you, emotions aren't a bad thing. God gave us our emotions. Even Jesus showed emotions over and over again. He showed his emotions of frustration, of disappointment with the disciples. Like, how long is it going to take you to get this lesson? When his friend Lazarus died, the Bible says Jesus wept. Jesus showed emotions in situations. So removing our emotions doesn't make us more logical. It actually makes us more dysfunctional. I love this quote, and don't take it out of context, it's just a quote. But emotions are like toddlers. You can't let them drive, but you can't throw them in the trunk. Think about that. We can't let our emotions rule our life, but we have to be aware of them and treat them the correct way. The somatic marker hypothesis is something I've been reading about in regards to getting ready for this message, and it's really fascinating. It was formulated by Antonio Damasio and several researchers along with him, and it proposes that emotional processes guide our behavior, learning, and particularly our decision-making. Let me say that again. The somatic marker hypothesis, it proposes that emotional processes guide our behavior, learning, and particularly our decision making. According to the hypothesis, somatic markers strongly influence our ability to decide wisely, quickly, and learn from past decisions. It's pretty powerful. Let me unwind it for you and unpackage it. In other words, you cannot make decisions without emotions. And emotions are the most powerful way we discover how to become better. You see, great decisions are not devoid of emotions. We're not removing all emotions. Rather, we're using those emotions and what we've learned from our emotions to make rapid responses to complex situations. So therefore, we shouldn't deny our emotions. We shouldn't ignore them. We shouldn't neglect them. We shouldn't be ruled by them. I'm not saying that. But we shouldn't obsess over them or indulge them. We must let God redeem them. What does that word redeem means? Let him take them back. Invite God into our emotions so that we can learn how to make rapid responses to complex situations. So how does Paul do this from his lockdown in his prison cell, his quarantine, if you will? He teaches us several ways that he allows God to redeem even his most difficult emotions. And to retrain our brain, we have to let God displace destructive thoughts. In Philippians 4:6, I want to read this again. It says, "And the peace of God, which transcends understanding, will guard your hearts." So we can have peace, even though we don't understand it. We can't imagine why we would have it, even in difficult circumstances. So how do we do that? Number one, I want to just kind of explain that negative thoughts are normal. Everyone has negative thoughts. Some of you have negative thoughts about why you got up this early right now to watch. We all have negative thoughts. Maybe you had something bad that happened yesterday, last week, last month that you're still chewing on. Maybe there's something going on in your life that you're having a difficult time with. We all have negative thoughts. In fact, a life with no negative thoughts can be very immature and risky. But the question is, are you using your negative thoughts or are they using you? What is your response to those negative thoughts? And then negative thoughts are better replaced, not repelled. I know a lot of people have done this, and I know I've done this many times in my life. It's like, I'm not going to think negative, and I'm not going to think bad, and I'm not going to do this. Y'all know the game? You know, the game where you can't think about the game or you lose the game? Some of you don't know what I'm talking about. Teenagers know this game. Like, there's this game, and the game is to not think about the game or you lose the game. Think about that. So, but to win the game, you have to not think about the game, but to not think about the game, you lose the game. See what I'm saying? That's kind of what we do with our negative thoughts. We're like, I can't think about negative thoughts. I can't think about negative thoughts, but now I'm thinking about the negative thoughts. So we can't just try to white knuckle them and like, I'm going to get through this. No. We have to allow God to help us swap out our negative thoughts for His. Have you ever been stressed out and gone for a hike? Do any of you guys like to hike? Any of you hikers? Or maybe your families are hikers and you go on hikes all the time? So I like hiking. My family doesn't. They're not big into it. But if you've ever been stressed out, maybe you go for a hike. And the further you get on this hike, or the higher you get here in Colorado, as you're hiking up this mountain or something, the more you kind of forget about all the crap that you're going through in your life. The more all those problems just kind of disappear and you're focused on what's right there. And then, of course, here in Colorado, we have all this natural beauty. And the higher you get, it's like the more just taken over by God's beautiful country that we live in this amazing state. But you're able to focus on God's creation, not your problems. You know, I think that's kind of what we need to do. We need to allow God to replace our thoughts. But to retrain our brain, we have to let God cultivate constructive thoughts. In verse 9, it says, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. We have to think about God in a lockdown and think about good things. So this is not some Disney movie positivity, like think good, boys and girls. No. This isn't some visualization in the universe will send it to you. It's not an exercise of manipulating God or our emotions or some mystical law. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But it's us making a persistent and practiced effort to focus on the nature and the work of God. So to do that with our minds, to stay focused on Him, sometimes we kind of have to put up some blocks in our life that we don't let our mind go to these negative places. A couple months ago, I was teaching the teenagers on this, and I used this illustration of kind of like bowling. So I don't know how many of you are into bowling. Do any of you guys like to bowl? How about you at home? Are you, maybe like in the comments if you're watching, type like your average score in bowling. I think mine's like 150, 170, which that makes me, I feel like I'm a pretty good bowler if I do that. But I know some of you guys are like high 200s and whatever. But, what is like your average scores? 80, 90. Here's the next question. Do you use the bumpers or not?
No.
Yes, no, about half and half. How about you at home? Do you use the bumpers when you're bowling? If you do, we're all going to make fun of you in the comments. I'm just kidding. But think about bumpers in our minds that protect us from going to these negative thoughts. And what is going to do that? How are we going to do that? We have to have some spiritual bumpers in our life to get us back on the right path. So how do we do that? Let's go back to the scripture. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. I want to remind you the lane that Paul was in at that time. The lane Paul was in at that time is he's locked up in a prison cell. It would have been so easy for him to get in that gutter in his mind of thinking about all the terrible circumstances that he's going through. But what did he do? He put up some spiritual bumpers that said, no, I'm going to focus on the good. I'm going to focus on what God is doing in me and what God can use me to do in this situation. And he didn't use that time to get, dealing with all this self-pity. He used it to help the church. So focusing on the good, not the negative. You know, I think we've all done this recently where you kind of imagine, now that restaurants are starting to open up, it's a little easier, but like a month or two ago, do any of you like dream about like, oh, I can't wait to go to a restaurant and sit down again? I did. Like, I can't wait to be around people. Right now, I'm like, I can't wait for football or basketball. I'm like a sports fanatic. So these things that we're looking forward to, you know, some of us, like, I got tired of looking at my living room walls all the time. It's kind of like, I want to go somewhere. And so actually in a couple days, me and my wife, we're going up to Steamboat for our anniversary. So love you, babe. Happy anniversary. But we got to get away. We got to get to the mountains. I just want to get out of our house. How many of you have been dreaming about going to the beach? I know, like, you know, a lot of times it's just like, I just want to go on vacation. Like, and maybe it's only been a few months, but it's just like, we're so tired of being at home. We're just ready to go. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but these are just physical destinations here on earth. But in just one chapter earlier, in Philippians chapter 3, here's what Paul said. He was remembering his ultimate destination. He said, our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. Wow. In all this situation, what was he thinking about? He's thinking about his ultimate destination. I just said how much I'm missing sports right now. I'm missing sports so much right now. I've been watching cornhole on ESPN. That's a new level of low. I will say those guys are really good. Just throwing it out there. Those guys are like amazing at cornhole. But let me just say this. I was watching golf last weekend. We actually had a real golf tournament with real golfers, and it was real competition, and it actually went into like sudden death or whatever it's called. Like they played extra holes, and I was so excited watching golf. I know I just lost all credibility with these teenagers. But I love golf. I grew up playing golf. I've played golf throughout my lifetime, but I still stink at golf. And I for the amount of time and money I've invested in the game of golf, I'm terrible at it. And but a few things I know about golf is, if you've ever tried to hit a little golf ball, you know how incredibly difficult it is to hit it exactly where you want to go, where you want it to go. It is extremely frustrating, and usually about once every 18 holes you'll get that one perfect shot, and that's why you go back. You're like, okay, I know I did it that once, I can keep going. But you know what golf is it is just muscle memory, over and over and over again, training yourself how to do it the right way. You know, Phil Mickelson, one of the greatest golfers who's ever lived, he's kind of on the tail end of his career now, but he literally would go out. He used to stink when he was early in his career at putting, and especially short putts. So he adopted a new routine where he would do nothing but hit 3-foot putts over and over and over again. And many of you, if you watch golf or know golf, you know what I'm talking about. He will literally just hit them over and over and work his way in a circle. And he practices that nonstop because of how much he used to struggle at that. And now it's automatic. It's automatic for him hitting those short ones because it's become muscle memory here. But this is the place we need to get to with our thoughts, that we've overcome these negative thoughts with thoughts of God and thoughts of the good things over and over again. It just becomes normal. It just becomes muscle memory for our brains. Tony Dungy, once again, third time I'm talking about sports here. Tony Dungy is a famous coach. Many of you guys know he coached for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then the Indianapolis Colts. I think he's one of the greatest coaches to ever live. Just an amazing, amazing man. But he wrote in one of his books talking about our thoughts and how crucial our thoughts are. He said, in the biggest games, you will get in trouble if you try to do more. When the pressure is on, you have to be able to do what you've been trained to do what you know to do. So in those crucial moments in the fourth quarter of a football game, don't press, don't do anything different. Just do what you've been trained to do, what you practice over and over and over again. So how can we change our thoughts? With deliberate decisions. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, it says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We have to control our thoughts because our thoughts are very easily, they just take off on us. I've heard it said like this: we're all about 5 minutes away from a mental breakdown if we let our minds go there. That's pretty sad, pretty funny, pretty interesting though. We're all about 5 minutes away from a mental breakdown if we let our thoughts go there. I want to wrap up with this, a final thought. So what is the most true, noble, and praiseworthy thing that Paul was thinking about when he was in that prison cell? It was the moment he met Christ. You know, Paul, and I know many of you guys know this story, but Paul, who authored roughly 2/3 of the New Testament, became a leader in the early church. But Paul was in his early days, when we first got introduced to Paul, his name was Saul. And his job was tormenting Christians. He wanted to shut down the entire effort of Christianity rising, of this new faith in Jesus Christ. He wanted to shut it down, and he was persecuting Christians. He was doing everything within his power to shut it down. And one time he was on the road and he was traveling to go do just that. He had new authority to take some Christians and lock them in prison. And that's when he met God. He was riding on this road to Damascus, and a bright light appeared, literally knocked him off his horse. And God began to speak to him and began to introduce himself to him. And I don't have time to get into the whole story, but through that series of events, Paul came to know the love of Christ, or Saul came to know the love of Christ. And later his name was changed to Paul. He literally had an identity change on the inside and the outside. He went from Saul to Paul. So when I think about this, what was going through his mind when he was locked up in this prison cell? He was thinking about what God had done in his life, the good things that God had done. He knew what he used to be. He knew the life he used to have, the life of living without hope, without knowing his future. But then he knew what it was like to live with Jesus, to have a relationship with Jesus. And right now, wherever you're at, I just want to encourage you, if you don't know who Jesus is, you've never started a relationship with him. You've never accepted him into your life to say, yeah, I want to live for you. I want to be a follower of yours. I want to encourage you this morning. Reach out to us in the chats. We have our staff pastors who are a part of this video right now. You can send us a message at the church. We would love to pray with you and be there with you as you start this journey with God. You know, I talked earlier about displacing destructive thoughts. I want to ask you this week to spend some time reflecting on this. And where do those destructive thoughts come from in your life? What is the source of these destructive thoughts in your life? Because once we know these, then we're more aware, and we know how to use those bumpers more effectively in our lives. And let God reveal that to you. And just a couple three of the main sources that destructive thoughts come from in our lives. Number one, it's from our circumstances. I get it. Some of you have not been dealt a very fair hand, and you feel like, well, I mean, I could control my thoughts better if I had her situation or if I had his situations, but Dallas, you don't know my situation. Destructive thoughts are still destructive thoughts, and they're still your responsibility to try to take, like Paul said, take those thoughts captive. Second place our destructive thoughts come from is from others. You know, sometimes others have some pretty negative thoughts and opinions of us that they just want to share with us, whether they're actually spoken to us or whether we just kind of take it on that that's what they think. And then the third place, and I think this is probably true for all of us, is ourselves. Many of us, we're our own greatest critic. We're pretty negative of ourselves. We're pretty negative of our abilities. We're pretty negative of our looks. We're pretty negative of our value. But we have to replace these destructive thoughts with God's thoughts. So I want to encourage you this week to spend some time reflecting on this and evaluating where these thoughts come from in your life. Take these negative thoughts captive and replace them with God thoughts, remembering our final destination. We're someday going to spend eternity with Jesus. And let that hope resonate in you that maybe things are rough right now. Maybe you've got some really rough circumstances, but God is still with us. So hope you have an incredible week. Once again, to all the dads out there, happy Father's Day.